On today's episode, the Path Monk Presents, I've got a very special guest with me joining today. Please welcome Dr. Jim, who is the VP of Growth and Product Evangelist at EngageRocket. Dr. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's an honor to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Yeah, likewise. We're super excited. So for all of our listeners out there, tell us, what does EngageRocket do overall?
So I'll try to bumper sticker this as much as I can. When you think about building elite teams, and especially for small to mid-size HR organizations, that's essentially what we help small to mid-size HR teams or small to mid-size organizations do. And the way that we do it is by creating an environment and a culture where you are in continuous listening mode. So what this allows you to do from a leadership perspective is that it allows you to empower your managers, keep your people keep your people engaged, and that's ultimately the formula that you need to build an elite organization. So primarily in terms of how we do it, we're a data and analytics platform. So if you're thinking about employee engagement surveys, pulse surveys, the analytics behind it, how you should prioritize, what you should prioritize, those are all things that we arm organizations with so that they can make better decisions in terms of their overall people strategy, and also do what's most important, which is keep their people engaged and retain their people.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really cool what you guys are doing overall in-house. So in terms of your clients, who would you say are your clients? Are you industry agnostic, or do you tend to focus on specific industry sectors?
So that's an interesting question, and a little bit of background on our story as far as EngageRocket, the company, is concerned. We're well established in Asia. We've been in Asia for over 7 years, and we just launched in the US about a month ago. So I'm primarily responsible for building our North American growth strategy, and we have some theories in terms of where our ideal buyer sits. In Asia, we're industry agnostic. I think for the North American market, we are working on niching into a specific segment that we want to build expertise in before we grow beyond there. So a lot of that is undefined as of right now. I think what is defined is that the problems that we solve are particularly present in those small to mid-size organizations. So think about organizations that are less than 5,000 employees, and more specifically, organizations that range between 300 and 3,000 employees. Those are the types of organizations that have the specific challenges that we solve for. And one of the things that we have to look at when we are thinking about that customer is that those size organizations, they can't afford to lose a bunch of people. You lose 2 or 3 of your best people in that size organization, you're going to feel the pain, versus you lose 2 or 3 top performers in a 10,000 person organization. It's going to hurt, but it's not going to be crushing. And our go-to-market is really focused on those small to mid-size organizations with really busy HR teams that want to get to that next level, but are stuck because their development and retention strategies are not fully formed, and they don't have the analytics to kind of back up or at least inform what are the things that they should be prioritizing from an employee engagement perspective and a manager effectiveness perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. It's really great what you're doing, especially with like the plan as well. So as for within the Asian market, how do your clients typically find you then? I understand, with breaking into the US market, you guys are still establishing that, but within the Asian market, what is your top client acquisition channel? Would it be digital marketing, inbound, SEO, SaaS content, or is it a mix of a lot of things?
So in the Asian market, it's a mix of a lot of things. And there's a fair amount of outbound that's tied to it. There's SEO and kind of like, I guess, rudimentary demand gen that exists out there too. There's a lot of content led, or not necessarily content led, but content enabled acquisition. But I wouldn't say it's really at the vision or at the level that I think it could be. And one of the thing, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm putting into motion for the US market is building out a fully integrated sales, marketing, partnerships, go to market motion that's content led, that's buyer led, with the intent of really accelerating growth by trying to identify the friction points in the buying process that our buyers encounter and smoothing that out so you can basically have a turnkey buying experience.
Wow. All right. I'm really excited. And especially with, I understand that with your background, with having worked within integrated sales, partnerships, and marketing into, single GTM motion. So why don't you elaborate, from your experience and, with integrating GTM, what can you, and what insights can you provide to our audience overall?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And I know a lot of people talk about a buyer-led GTM now or an integrated GTM now. It's not really anything different than what I've been doing throughout my career. And to give you a little bit of context, I've been primarily actually, I've been exclusively in the sales space. I only pretend to be a marketer on LinkedIn, but throughout my sales career, I'd never really liked the smile and dial, let's spam our TAM approach that most sales organizations go to market with. Everybody treating every person that you meet as if they're a buyer is really a dumb way to go to market because it makes everything that you do so transactional. So that never worked for me. And this isn't my first rodeo, so I've been doing it for a while. So I always look for approaches where I would try to identify who do my buyers go to learn from, and how do I get that resource in the room with my buyers and facilitate sort of an educational experience. So, yeah, you can call it education-based selling or whatever, but I used to work in the staffing and recruiting industry, and I built a division from 0 clients and 0 revenue to an $8 million business using that education-based approach, because I knew that my hiring managers and directors of IT would look to CIOs at conferences to like gain industry trends or whatever. So I started doing a bunch of lunch and learns and building a market that way. So I applied that same principle to what I've been doing over the last several years is how do we educate and inspire our buyer community and build relationships first. And then based on how those relationships evolve, you'll create a buyer at some point. And that's really the crux of my go-to-market is that customer for life mentality. Instead of treating everybody as if they're the 3% that happen to be in the buy cycle, how do you build authentic relationships across 100% of your prospect universe and really understand where they're at in their journey and just serve them across where they are? I mean, one of the principal components of effective leadership is meet people where they are. Well, why aren't we doing that from a sales perspective? Why aren't we meeting our buyers where they are instead of assuming the buyers are where we want them to be and then trying to like squish them into a buy cycle? So that's really kind of how I approach things. A lot of what we're doing from a North American go-to-market perspective is rooted in that. It's similar to what I was doing in partnerships in the role that I had previously. And, I've been doing this sort of stuff for years.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So with what you have done within your role and your experience, and with developing this buyer persona, and with figuring out what works best in terms of how to get a customer for life, what are some trends that you have seen that have been reoccurring? Obviously, I know trends are constantly changing, but what have at least you noticed within your realm and like the markets that your company serves?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at the trends specific to the HR organizations that or HR buyer that we sell to, the trends are real simple. I think when you're looking at small to mid-sized organizations that have busy HR teams, so think of HR teams that are less than 15 people. Most of HR in those size organizations have been relegated into sort of an administrative function versus a real people strategy function. And here's what I mean by that. Those organizations at that size are in scale up or accelerating growth mode. They're focused on how quickly can we grow, how can we get big and get to that next level. And what happens is for you to get from where you are as a late stage startup to that accelerating growth phase, you have to completely change your processes and procedures. What got you to the point that you are isn't going to get you to that 5,000 or 10,000 employee mark. The problem is that culturally, within those sort of organizations, when you look at any sort of people related requirements or processes, the line managers or the business leaders will often push all of that back into HR and say, that's an HR thing. We don't want to deal with it. And a good example is when you think about how do you build out individual development plans for your people? Well, that's an HR issue. How are we going to effectively train and onboard our new hires? Part of that is an HR issue, but the disconnect is that business leaders often think that that's all an HR issue, where frankly, when you're dealing with a small HR team or a busy HR team in a much larger organization, they don't have the bandwidth to kind of carry an employee through the entire life cycle. So managers and business leaders need to step up. And that's where we actually step in and give, or at least empower, both HR and line managers with the tools that they need to kind of create that communication culture that allows you to build the habits that you need to have the process in place for you to get from, that late stage startup to, the much larger organization.
Wow. Okay. Now, like, since you've broken it down now, it makes so much more sense as to like how you guys are able to solve and tackle these things. So that's
yeah. I mean, I think one last point on that is the issue that, for organizations to scale effectively and, at all levels of the business, you can't just run and do stuff and then push all of the operational responsibility off to HR. The shift that needs to happen is that managers at the business level, directors at the business level have to lock arms with HR and carry some of these things forward and build the habits that are necessary to basically keep your people engaged and keep them motivated to the work. One of the biggest trends that we've seen so far in the market research that we're doing is that when we're talking to small to mid-size HR leaders in small to mid-sized organizations, one of the biggest comments that come up is, hey, our executive leadership are doing a great job in terms of communicating the vision, but somehow when we get to the line level, at the manager level and at the employee level, all of that gets lost. Nobody is really doing a good job of connecting that vision to the execution. And the problem is that the reason why that's happening is that managers at that level are pushing that to HR when it actually should be owned by the managers. Managers take the vision and build the plan for execution and then tie that to the personal professional vision of their team, which is actually what creates the momentum for you to grow aggressively.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I didn't know. I learned a lot too just by listening about what you've been explaining to us within the GMT and what's worked and what you've seen in the industry. So thank you for that.
No problem.
So we're at the end of our interview today, and I want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. But I also want to give you the last word. If anyone were to forget about everything we've talked about in your interview today, what is the one thing you want them to remember about EngageRocket overall?
I mean, I think in broad terms, the thing that I want HR practitioners, HR leaders, and also business leaders to keep in mind is that what you did as a startup organization isn't going to work if you're trying to go up market and become more of an enterprise organization. And even if that isn't your goal, if you just want to have a high performing organization, the number one lesson that I'll offer is this: you can't rest on the erroneous belief that all of your people management and people leadership strategy is owned by HR and the execution is owned by HR. For an organization to be performing at a high level, you need to be, as a leader, lockstep with some of the people initiatives that HR is driving. And you need to carry that forward to your individual employees on the team, because you're the connective tissue that aligns the strategy that senior leadership is building to the execution. If you don't play that role as a line level manager or director within a small to mid-sized organization, you're going to have chaos, and you're going to have a lot of people that don't know why they're doing the work that they're doing. And you're likely to lose those people, which just creates this hamster wheel of you constantly having to hire, train, develop, only to lose those people because they're not connected to the vision and mission of the organization.
Yeah.
That's what I would offer.
Amazing. You summed it up perfectly too, especially with ending with that as well. So, Dr. Jim, thank you so much again. It was our pleasure. I enjoyed having you on the podcast. And for all of our listeners out there, check us out next week